They came from the frozen edges of the known world, from fjords carved by glaciers into the bones of the earth, from a land where winter lasted longer than memory and the sea was both prison and promise. We call them Vikings, and in that single word we have managed to both honor and diminish them simultaneously, conjuring horned helmets that never existed, brutality stripped of its context, savagery divorced from its sophistication. The truth, as it so often does, runs deeper than the myth, older than the legend, and far more consequential than the caricature we have inherited. The Norse people did not simply raid the edges of medieval civilization. They rewired it. They pressed their fingerprints into the clay of Europe while it was still soft, and those impressions have never fully faded. To understand the Vikings, you must first understand the world that made them. Scandinavia in the early medieval period was no wasteland of barbarism. It was a place of complex social hierarchies, remarkable craftsmanship, sophisticated oral traditions, and a theology as intricate and emotionally alive as any in the ancient world. The Norse cosmos was held together by Yggdrasil, the great world tree, its roots drinking from wells of wisdom and fate, its branches sheltering 9 distinct realms of existence. These were not primitive stories. They were a people's attempt to make meaning out of a landscape that offered beauty and annihilation in equal measure. The same forces that sculpted the fjords, ice, pressure, the relentless patience of geological time, also sculpted the Norse character, hard, adaptive, profoundly aware of mortality. The 8th century changed everything. Population pressures, the scarcity of arable land, political instability among competing chieftains, and advances in shipbuilding technology created conditions that would send Norse sailors erupting outward in every direction. In 793, the monastery at Lindisfarne off the northeastern coast of England was struck with a ferocity that stunned the Christian world. Alcuin of York, one of the great scholars of the Carolingian age, wrote in anguish that such violence had never been seen before on British shores. He was wrong about that, historically speaking, but he was right about one thing. Something had fundamentally shifted. A new force had entered the theater of medieval Europe, and it would not leave quietly or soon. The Longship was the instrument of this transformation, and to call it merely a boat is to call a cathedral merely a building. Norse shipwrights had solved problems that would elude other maritime cultures for centuries. Their vessels were clinker-built, with overlapping planks that gave the hull a flexibility capable of absorbing the violence of open-ocean swells. They were shallow-drafted enough to navigate rivers deep into continental interiors, yet seaworthy enough to cross the North Atlantic without landmarks or instruments beyond the stars and the behavior of seabirds. The Longship was simultaneously a warship, a cargo vessel, a symbol of status, and a vehicle of cultural transmission. When it landed on a foreign shore, it did not merely disgorge raiders, it disgorged a world view. And yet the raid was only one face of Norse expansion. The other face, quieter, less cinematic, ultimately more consequential, was trade and settlement. The Varangian routes, those extraordinary networks of rivers and portages that cut through what is now Russia and Ukraine, were largely pioneered and dominated by Norse traders who had pressed east and south through the Baltic. They called themselves the Rus, and from them an entire civilization would eventually take its name. They established trading posts at Novgorod and Kiev. They brought furs, amber, and slaves down to Constantinople, returning with silver, silk, and spices. They served as elite bodyguards to the Byzantine emperors, the Varangian Guard, warriors so formidable and so loyal that the Byzantine court trusted them above all others with imperial protection. These were not barbarians standing outside civilization. They were threading themselves through its arteries. To the west, the story was equally astonishing. Norsemen settled the Orkney and Shetland Islands, the Faroe Islands, and then Iceland, where they established one of the earliest parliamentary institutions in the medieval world, the Althing, convened in 930, a gathering of free men who debated law and settled disputes in the shadow of volcanic rock and geothermal steam. From Iceland, the restless and the banished pushed further. Erik the Red, exiled for manslaughter, sailed into the North Atlantic and found Greenland, naming it with the salesman's instinct for optimism over accuracy. His son, Leif Erikson, went further still. Around the year 1000, nearly 5 centuries before Columbus, Norse sailors made landfall in a place they called Vinland, a coastline rich with timber and wild grapes, almost certainly the northeastern coast of North America. Loss o' Meadows in Newfoundland, excavated in the 1960s, stands as the archaeological proof. Norse presence in the Americas, undeniable and extraordinary, a fact still struggling to fully penetrate popular consciousness. In Normandy, a Norse chieftain named Rollo, unable to be defeated by the Frankish king Charles the Simple, was instead given land, the land of the Northmen, Normandy, in exchange for loyalty and the promise of future protection against further raids. From that settlement would emerge, within a few generations, the Normans. Norse blood filtered through French culture, Christianity, and feudal ambition. And it was those Normans who, in 1066, would conquer England under William and reshape the English language, the English legal system, and the English aristocracy in ways that persist to this very day. Every time an English speaker uses words like government, justice, or parliament, they are speaking through the long chain of consequence that begins with Viking longships and ends, improbably, in the House of Commons. The Norse also left their marks in religion and mythology in ways that are woven into the fabric of modern Western culture more completely than most people realize. The days of the week carry their names. Tuesday for Tyr, the god of law and war. Wednesday for Odin, the All-Father. Thursday for Thor, the Thunderer. Friday for Frigg, goddess of wisdom and foresight. These are not merely etymological curiosities. They are the residue of a living belief system, preserved in the most mundane rhythms of modern life, spoken billions of times each week by people who never pause to consider that they are invoking the Norse pantheon every time they make a dinner reservation or write a date on a form. The Viking Age is conventionally said to end around 1100, as Scandinavia converted to Christianity and integrated more fully into the broader European political order. But ending is the wrong word. What happened was more like a metamorphosis. The energy, the expansiveness, the ferocious creativity of Norse civilization did not disappear. It transformed. It became the DNA of nations. It became legal traditions and linguistic patterns and geographic place names from Normandy to Newfoundland, from Dublin, a Norse foundation, to the Russian steppes. It became the literary tradition of the sagas, those remarkable prose narratives written down in Iceland in the 12th and 13th centuries, which stand among the great achievements of world literature for their psychological realism, their moral complexity, and their unsentimental portrayal of human ambition and consequence. The sagas do not lie about what people are. They understand that great people do terrible things, and that terrible things are sometimes done by people we cannot help but admire. Today, when we speak of the interconnectedness of the world, when we marvel at how cultures collide and merge and produce something entirely new, we are describing a process the Norse understood instinctively 1,000 years before we found the language for it. They remind us that civilization has never moved in straight lines, that the engines of history have often been ships on cold water, and men and women willing to sail past the edge of the known. If this story moved you, if it made you feel the spray of the North Atlantic or hear the creak of a longship hull in the dark, then you already understand what we do here. The past is never truly past. It echoes. And here, on the echoes of ages, where forgotten worlds speak again, we listen together. Until next time.